If you've been following my channel or have checked out my website, you'll probably see that I have given you several different options for sandwich bread recipes. Some of them gluten-free, some of them not. Some of them low-carb but not keto-friendly, some of them gluten-free and keto-friendly. And today, I am back with yet another sandwich bread recipe. But this one is gluten-free, keto-friendly, and dairy-free, which means no sour cream, no milk, no eggs, no dairy at all. But yet, you still get that nice fluffy rise and that nice soft texture that we all love in bread. So if you want a printable version of this, then check out my website at janetsdeliciouslowcarbkitchen.com. You can find a printable version of this and other goodies there for you. And if you're new to the channel, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Also, don't forget to hit that little notification bell. That way you can be notified every time I put out a new video. And while you do that, let's get cooking. First off, we're going to need to set up our oven. Take one of your oven racks and place it on the lowest track in your oven without it touching the heating elements. Next, take your second oven rack and put it on the next lowest track in your oven. Make sure there's space between the two of them because you're going to be putting a casserole dish in between the two of them. And we'll get to that and why we do that in a little bit. After you've adjusted your racks, then preheat your oven to 210 degrees. Line an 8.5 by 4.5 inch loaf pan with parchment paper. When you line your loaf pan, make sure the parchment paper is hanging over the sides. You're going to be using this as handles once you cook your bread and lift your bread out. So make sure that the paper is hanging over the sides but not dragging. You don't want it to be dragging on your oven rack when you put it in to cook. So just hanging over the sides just enough that you can grasp it and be able to lift your bread out when it's done cooking. Once your oven's fully preheated to the 210 degrees, take 6 cups of very hot water and pour it into a 3-quart casserole dish. Make sure the water is very hot. You can put it on the stove and boil it if you want to, and then pour it into the casserole dish, or you can microwave it for a couple minutes and then pour it in the casserole dish, or you can just do what I do. My tap water gets very hot, so I just turn my tap water on as hot as it can go and let it run for a couple minutes. Then when it's as hot as it can be, I fill up the 6 cups and pour it into my casserole dish. Either way, make sure the water is very hot. After you've poured the hot water into your casserole dish, then carefully place the casserole dish onto the bottom rack in your oven. Then close up the oven so the heat doesn't escape. You want to be able to make a nice, warm, moist place for your bread to be able to rise in. In a large mixing bowl, add 3 cups almond flour, 10 tablespoons of coconut flour. I know this is an odd amount, but it works. Trust me. A half cup of flaxseed meal. Make sure it's very finely ground. You don't want extra grit in your bread. 6 tablespoons of psyllium husk powder. Again, make sure this also is very finely ground. You want as little grit as you can in your bread. 1 tablespoon baking powder. And 5 teaspoons of instant yeast. Whisk these all together until they're fully combined. Once they're combined, add 2.5 teaspoons of salt, and again whisk it all together until everything is fully combined and there's no lumps in the flour. I always add my salt last after I've whisked the yeast all in, only because if you add salt directly onto yeast, you run the risk of killing your yeast. Now, if it's just there for a couple seconds, it won't kill it, but if you add your yeast and then add your salt right on top of it and don't whisk it right away, it can kill your yeast. So for me, it's safer if I just mix all the other dry ingredients first and then add my salt, because once the yeast is mixed in with all the other ingredients, you don't have to worry about the salt killing off the yeast. So once the dry ingredients are fully combined, set the bowl aside, and in a large mixer bowl, add 1/4 cup of apple cider vinegar, 1/4 cup of oil of your choice. I'm using canola oil. You can use any oil you want. And 2.5 cups of warm water. Make sure the water is warm. This is yeast bread recipe. Yeast has to have a warm, moist environment in order for it to be active. If you have cold water or room temperature water, it's not going to work. Your yeast will not be active. So make sure it is warm. Anywhere from 122 to 132 degrees is perfect. So nice and warm. Then slowly add your dry ingredients to your wet ingredients. Make sure you go slowly and carefully. You don't want your dry ingredients showering all over the place. Beat it all together on low for about 20 seconds or just until the dry ingredients are wet. Change the paddle attachment on your standing mixer out to a dough hook attachment. Then beat on high for 3 minutes or until the dough is nice and smooth and stretchy. Now if you don't have a dough hook attachment, it's okay. You can just use the paddle attachment and it still will turn out fine. I always use a dough hook attachment when I'm doing yeast bread because I feel that it makes the dough more airy, which results in a fluffier bread after it's all done baked. The texture is nice and fluffy because of that extra air that the dough hook puts into your dough. But if you don't have a dough hook attachment, it's okay. The paddle attachment will do just fine and your bread will still be nice and fluffy and tasty. So don't worry about it ruining your recipe if you don't have a dough hook. It will work just fine with the paddle. Once you've beat it on high for 3 minutes and the dough's all nice and smooth and stretchy, shape the dough into an oval and place it into your prepared loaf pan. Now one thing you don't want to do is you don't want to overhandle your dough. So don't push and press it down or flatten it or try to get the oval just perfect or try to get everything just perfect in the loaf pan. Don't do that because the more you handle your dough, the more you're letting the air out of your dough, which results in a less fluffy texture when you're letting the air out of your dough. So you want to make sure you keep as much air in that dough as you can so you have a light fluffy texture of bread. So try not to overhandle it. All you got to do is make sure it's in some type of a loaf shape and put it in the pan. Then cover it loosely with a damp, clean kitchen towel. Make sure it is slightly damp, not soaking wet, but just slightly damp. This just helps it to where the dough doesn't stick to the towel when it rises. Then place it on the second rack of your oven and let it rise for 1 hour or just until it's risen above the top of the pan. After it's risen, remove the towel, then leave the loaf pan and the casserole dish with the water in the oven and preheat your oven to 350 degrees. You do not have to take your pan out while it's preheating. Leave it all in there. That way it stays nice and warm and moist as the oven is coming up to 350 degrees. Once the oven reaches 350 degrees, then bake your bread for about an hour or until a tester comes out clean and the internal temperature is around 200 degrees. Now make sure you don't start your baking timer until your oven is fully preheated to that 350 degrees. Once it has fully preheated, then start the timing of your baking. Once it's done baking, remove the pan from the oven and let the bread sit in the pan for at least 1 hour. This is very important. Do not try to take it out before the hour is up. Your bread is still cooking when you first take it out of the oven. So it needs to have time to finish cooking, and then it needs to have time for all the ingredients to set in place and lock together really good before you remove it from the pan. So make sure you let it sit for that hour so everything can cool down and everything can start locking into place. Once it's cooled for the hour, then grab the handles that you made from your parchment paper and gently lift the bread out of the pan and place it on a wire rack to cool. Let it cool completely before you slice it. Make sure you don't try to slice it while it's warm. Let it cool completely. That way all the ingredients settle into place really good. Once it's cooled completely, slice it up, make yourself a sandwich, make some toast, however you want to eat it. Just eat it and enjoy it. And that's our recipe of the day. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, give me a big fat thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. And if you'd like, you can leave me a comment and let me know if there's any recipes that you'd like to learn how to make, and I'll do what I can to get those out there for you. And as always, keep cooking.